Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the long corridor of the Coronado Naval Base firing range, the wheels squeaking against the polished concrete floor. At 42 years old, she had been working as a custodian at the facility for nearly 8 years, invisible to most of the elite Navy SEALs who trained there daily. Her small frame and quiet demeanor made her blend into the background, just another face among the support staff that kept the base running smoothly. The morning sun filtered through the high windows as she began her routine, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces in the administrative areas before moving to the actual shooting ranges. She had memorized every corner of this place, every schedule, every routine. The SEALs arrived at 600 hours sharp for their morning training sessions, their boots echoing through the halls with military precision. As Maria cleaned the observation deck overlooking Range 7, she could hear the familiar sounds of training below. Commander Jake Morrison was conducting another sniper assessment, his voice carrying across the range as he barked instructions to the candidates. Maria had watched hundreds of these sessions over the years, always from a distance, always unnoticed. "Thompson, your breathing is off. You're rushing the shot," Commander Morrison's voice boomed. "A Navy SEAL sniper needs patience, control, and absolute precision. One shot, one kill. That's not just a motto, it's a responsibility." Maria continued her work, but her eyes drifted to the shooting positions below. She had observed so many of these training sessions that she could predict which candidates would succeed and which would fail just by watching their stance and breathing patterns. It was something she had never shared with anyone, this unusual ability to read shooters. During her lunch break, Maria often sat in the small break room adjacent to the armory, eating her homemade sandwich while listening to the instructors discuss the morning's performance. Today was no different as she overheard Sergeant Williams talking to another instructor. "These new recruits are struggling with the long-range targets," Sergeant Williams said, shaking his head. "We've had 12 candidates this week, and only 3 have qualified for the advanced course. The 800-yard shot is breaking them." Maria knew about that particular challenge. The 800-yard target required not just accuracy, but an understanding of wind patterns, humidity, and a dozen other variables that could affect the bullet's trajectory. She had watched countless SEALs attempt it, noting how the successful ones adjusted their position and breathing in the moments before taking the shot. After finishing her lunch, Maria returned to her duties on the range. As she cleaned the brass casings from the morning session, she found herself studying the target sheets that had been discarded. Each one told a story of near misses and failed attempts. The groupings were tight in some cases but consistently off target, suggesting fundamental errors in technique rather than equipment malfunction. That afternoon, a new group of SEAL candidates arrived for their assessment. Among them was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, one of the few women attempting to qualify for the elite sniper program. Maria had noticed her during previous training sessions, impressed by her determination despite the obvious skepticism from some of her male counterparts. As the afternoon session began, Maria found herself paying particular attention to Lieutenant Chen's performance. The young officer's stance was textbook perfect, her breathing controlled, but Maria could see a slight tremor in her hands that would affect her accuracy at longer ranges. It was subtle, something that might escape even experienced instructors, but Maria's years of observation had taught her to notice these small details. The candidates began with closer targets, working their way up to the challenging 800-yard shot. One by one, they failed to achieve the required accuracy. Even Lieutenant Chen, despite her obvious skill, fell short of the mark that would qualify her for advancement. Commander Morrison's frustration was evident as he called an end to the session. "Same story, different day," he muttered to Sergeant Williams. "These candidates have all the technical knowledge, but they're missing something fundamental. It's like they're overthinking every shot instead of trusting their training." As the disappointed candidates filed out of the range, Maria continued her cleaning duties. She noticed that Lieutenant Chen lingered behind, studying the targets and shaking her head in frustration. The young officer's disappointment was palpable, and Maria felt an unexpected urge to offer encouragement, though she knew it wasn't her place. Later that evening, as Maria prepared to leave for the day, she overheard a conversation between Commander Morrison and the base's commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez. They were discussing the declining pass rates for the sniper program and the pressure from higher command to maintain the elite standards while still producing qualified snipers. "We can't lower our standards," Commander Morrison insisted. "But at this rate, we'll have more instructors than qualified snipers. There's something these candidates aren't grasping, and I can't put my finger on what it is." Captain Rodriguez nodded gravely. "The Pentagon is asking questions, Jake. We need results, and we need them soon. Maybe it's time to bring in outside consultants or review our training methods." As Maria walked to her car in the parking lot, she reflected on what she had witnessed that day. 8 years of watching, learning, and observing had given her insights that she had never shared with anyone. She understood the nuances of marksmanship in a way that went beyond technical manuals and classroom instruction. The next morning brought another group of candidates, including several who had failed previous assessments and were getting their final chance to qualify. The pressure in the air was thick as Commander Morrison addressed the group. "Gentlemen and lady," he said, nodding toward Lieutenant Chen, "this is your last opportunity to prove you have what it takes to be a Navy SEAL sniper. The standards haven't changed, and neither has the requirement for absolute precision. You know what you need to do." Maria watched from the observation deck as the familiar routine began. The candidates started with known distance targets, gradually working their way to the challenging long-range shots that had defeated so many before them. She could see the tension in their movements, the way pressure affected their normally steady hands. As she cleaned nearby, Maria noticed something that the instructors had missed. The wind patterns on the range had shifted since the morning, but the flags that indicated wind direction hadn't been updated. It was a subtle change, but one that would affect the trajectory of bullets at longer ranges. She wanted to mention it to someone, but knew that a custodian offering tactical advice to Navy SEAL instructors would be met with ridicule at best. The morning session progressed with predictable results. One after another, the candidates failed to achieve the required accuracy on the 800-yard target. Lieutenant Chen came closest, but her shots were still outside the qualifying circle. The frustration among both candidates and instructors was mounting. During the break, Maria overheard Commander Morrison talking to Captain Rodriguez on the phone. "Sir, we've had another morning of failures. At this point, I'm beginning to think we need to completely overhaul our training program. These candidates have all the physical ability and technical knowledge, but something just isn't clicking." As the afternoon session prepared to begin, an unexpected visitor arrived at the range. Master Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres, a legendary sniper with over 20 years of experience, had come to observe the training and possibly offer insights into the declining pass rates. Master Chief Torres watched silently as the afternoon candidates went through their paces. His weathered face showed no emotion as shot after shot missed the mark on the long-range targets. Maria had heard stories about Master Chief Torres, how he held records for some of the longest confirmed kills in Navy SEAL history. After watching several failures, Master Chief Torres requested permission to demonstrate proper technique. The entire range fell silent as the legendary sniper took position at the 800-yard line. Maria found herself holding her breath along with everyone else as Master Chief Torres prepared for his shot. The rifle cracked, and a moment later, the spotter called out the result. The shot had hit the target, but not in the center ring as everyone expected. It was a good shot by normal standards, but not the perfection everyone anticipated from a living legend. Master Chief Torres frowned and fired again. The second shot was closer, but still not the bull's accuracy he was known for. A murmur went through the watching crowd as the third shot also failed to achieve perfect center mass. "Something's off," Master Chief Torres muttered, examining his rifle. "The fundamentals are right, but the results aren't matching." From her position on the observation deck, Maria could see what the others couldn't. The wind flags were still showing the morning conditions, but the actual wind patterns had shifted throughout the day. Additionally, the humidity had increased, which would affect bullet trajectory at longer ranges. These factors, combined with the afternoon sun creating heat mirages that would distort target acquisition, created conditions that none of the shooters were compensating for. As Maria watched Master Chief Torres prepare for a fourth attempt, she noticed him making a slight adjustment to his scope. It was a small correction, but not enough to account for all the variables affecting the range conditions. She found herself silently calculating the additional adjustments needed, her years of observation having taught her to read the subtle environmental factors that influenced long-range accuracy. The legendary sniper fired his fourth shot, and while it was closer to center mass, It still wasn't the perfect shot everyone expected. Master Chief Torres stood up from his shooting position, clearly frustrated by his performance. "Range conditions aren't what they appear," he announced to the assembled candidates and instructors. "There are variables at play here that aren't immediately obvious. A true sniper needs to read the environment, not just follow the technical specifications." Commander Morrison approached Master Chief Torres with a concerned expression. "Sir, if you're having difficulty with the range conditions, what hope do these candidates have?" The legendary sniper studied the range layout, the wind flags, and the target placement. "The fundamentals of marksmanship haven't changed, but every range has its own personality. Someone who spends time here daily would have insights that even an experienced shooter visiting for the first time might miss." As the afternoon session concluded with more failures, Maria began her evening cleaning routine. She moved through the range methodically, collecting brass casings and cleaning shooting positions. Her movements were automatic, perfected by years of repetition, but her mind was focused on the problem that had stumped some of the military's best marksmen. That night, as Maria drove home to her small apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about what she had witnessed. She had spent nearly a decade watching the world's most elite soldiers struggle with challenges that seemed solvable to her. The knowledge she had accumulated through patient observation felt like a burden that she carried alone. In her apartment, Maria sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a notebook. For the first time, she began writing down her observations about the range, the environmental factors, and the patterns she had noticed in successful versus failed attempts. Page after page filled with details that she had never shared with anyone, insights gained from thousands of hours of silent observation. As she wrote, Maria realized that her unique perspective as an invisible observer had given her knowledge that might be valuable. She had watched without the pressure of performance, analyzed without ego, and learned without the constraints of preconceived notions about how things should be done. The question that kept her awake that night was whether she would ever have the courage to share what she had learned, knowing that her input as a custodian would likely be dismissed or ridiculed by the very people who desperately needed her insights. The following morning brought an unusual atmosphere to the Coronado Naval Base firing range. Word had spread about Master Chief Torres' unexpected difficulties with the 800-yard target, and a sense of unease permeated the facility. Maria arrived early as always, but today she carried her notebook hidden in her cleaning supplies, the pages filled with observations she had compiled the night before. Commander Morrison looked haggard as he prepared for another day of assessments. The pressure from higher command was mounting, and the continued failures of highly trained candidates were beginning to reflect poorly on his instruction methods. Maria could see the stress etched on his face as he reviewed the training schedule with Sergeant Williams. "We have Admiral Patterson visiting next week to observe our training protocols," Commander Morrison said, his voice tight with tension. "If we can't show significant improvement in pass rates, they're talking about bringing in civilian contractors to overhaul our entire program." The morning session began with a new group of candidates, including several SEALs who were attempting the course for the third and final time. Among them was Petty Officer First Class David Kim, whose previous 2 attempts had fallen just short of qualification standards. Maria had watched his earlier attempts and noticed that he consistently pulled his shots slightly to the left, a habit that became more pronounced under pressure. As the candidates worked through their preliminary exercises, Maria found herself paying closer attention than usual. She had spent the early morning hours reviewing her notes and correlating her observations with environmental data she had quietly collected over the years. The patterns were clear to her now in ways they had never been before. Lieutenant Chen was back for her second attempt, her determination evident in every movement. Maria watched as the young officer set up her shooting position, noting the subtle improvements in her stance since the previous session. However, Maria could still see the slight hand tremor that would affect accuracy at longer ranges, a nervous habit that increased under observation. The morning progressed with familiar disappointment. One candidate after another failed to achieve the required precision on the long-range targets. The instructors grew more frustrated with each missed shot, their own confidence in the training program beginning to waver. During the break, Maria overheard a heated conversation between Commander Morrison and Master Chief Torres, who had returned to continue studying the range conditions. "I've been analyzing yesterday's performance," Master Chief Torres said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. There are definitely environmental factors at play that aren't being accounted for. The wind patterns here are more complex than they appear, and the afternoon heat creates conditions that aren't immediately obvious. Commander Morrison nodded grimly. My instructors are among the best in the Navy, but if they're missing something fundamental about this range, we need to figure it out fast. As Maria cleaned nearby, pretending to focus on her work while listening intently, she felt an almost overwhelming urge to contribute to the conversation. Her notebook, hidden in her cart, contained detailed observations about the exact issues they were discussing. She knew the wind patterns, understood the heat mirage effects, and had identified the optimal times and positions for different shooting scenarios. The afternoon brought a special session as Admiral Patterson's advance team arrived to observe the training protocols. The pressure on everyone was intense as they prepared for what was essentially an evaluation of the entire sniper program. Maria watched from her usual position on the observation deck as the demonstration began. Commander Morrison had selected his best candidates for the session, but the familiar pattern of near misses and failed attempts continued. The visiting officers exchanged concerned glances as shot after shot failed to meet the demanding standards. Lieutenant Chen was called forward for her attempt at the 800-yard target. Maria found herself silently rooting for the determined young officer, but she could see the same technical issues that had caused previous failures. As Lieutenant Chen settled into her shooting position, Maria noticed something the instructors had missed. The lieutenant had unconsciously adjusted her position to compensate for what she perceived as wind conditions, but she was overcompensating based on the outdated wind flags. Her natural instincts were actually correct, but the visual indicators were telling her to make unnecessary adjustments. The shot rang out across the range, and Maria watched as the bullet struck well outside the qualifying circle. Lieutenant Chen's shoulders sagged with disappointment, and Maria felt a surge of frustration that valuable insights were going unused simply because of her position as support staff. After the session, Maria overheard Admiral Patterson's representative speaking privately with Commander Morrison. The conversation was not encouraging. Admiral Patterson is concerned about the declining performance metrics, the representative said. We're seeing similar issues at other facilities, but Coronado has traditionally been the gold standard for sniper training. If this continues, we'll have no choice but to implement significant changes to the program. That evening, as Maria prepared to leave the base, an unexpected encounter changed everything. Lieutenant Chen was sitting alone on a bench outside the range, still in her training uniform, staring at her hands with obvious frustration. Maria had never spoken directly to any of the candidates during her 8 years at the facility, but something about the young officer's dejection moved her to break her usual pattern of invisibility. She approached cautiously, unsure of her reception. "Excuse me, Lieutenant," Maria said quietly. "I don't mean to intrude, but I've watched your training sessions, and I think you're closer to qualifying than you realize." Lieutenant Chen looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting conversation from the custodial staff. "I appreciate that," she replied politely, "but the targets don't lie. I'm missing by margins that shouldn't exist for someone with my training." Maria hesitated for a moment, then decided to take a risk that could change both their lives. "May I show you something? I've been observing the range for 8 years, and I've noticed patterns that might help." Something in Maria's voice, perhaps the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years studying a problem from a unique perspective, prompted Lieutenant Chen to agree. Maria retrieved her notebook from her cart and opened it to pages filled with detailed observations about wind patterns, heat effects, and optimal shooting conditions. Lieutenant Chen's eyes widened as she reviewed Maria's meticulously documented insights. The notebook contained information that went far beyond casual observation, revealing a deep understanding of the factors affecting long-range accuracy at this specific location. "This is incredibly detailed," Lieutenant Chen said, her voice filled with amazement. "You've documented variables that our instructors haven't even mentioned. How did you learn all this?" Maria smiled sadly. 8 years of watching and learning with no one to share the information with. I've seen hundreds of candidates struggle with the same issues, knowing what adjustments might help but having no way to communicate it. Lieutenant Chen studied the notebook more intently, her military training allowing her to quickly grasp the implications of Maria's observations. These wind pattern charts correlate with times of day when most candidates fail, and these heat distortion notes explain why afternoon sessions have lower success rates. The two women spent the next hour discussing Maria's findings, with Lieutenant Chen asking technical questions that revealed her deep understanding of marksmanship principles. Maria found herself explaining concepts she had developed through years of observation, theories about environmental compensation that had never been formally tested. "Would you be willing to help me prepare for tomorrow's session?" Lieutenant Chen asked. "I know it's unusual, but your insights could make the difference between success and failure." Maria agreed, though both women understood they were entering uncharted territory. A custodian coaching a Navy SEAL candidate was unprecedented, but desperation and mutual respect had created an unlikely partnership. The next morning, Maria arrived even earlier than usual. She had spent the night refining her recommendations based on the predicted weather conditions and time of day for Lieutenant Chen's scheduled attempt. Hidden in the maintenance areas of the range, she waited for the opportunity to provide guidance without attracting attention from the instructors. As the training session began, Maria positioned herself where she could observe both the environmental conditions and Lieutenant Chen's preparations. Using subtle hand signals they had agreed upon, she provided real-time information about wind changes and optimal timing for the shot. Lieutenant Chen incorporated Maria's guidance into her preparation, making adjustments that appeared minor but addressed the specific conditions affecting the range that morning. The other candidates and instructors were unaware of the covert coaching taking place, focusing instead on their standard protocols. When Lieutenant Chen's turn came for the 800-yard shot, Maria watched with intense anxiety. All her years of observation, all the insights she had quietly accumulated, were about to be tested in the most public way possible. Lieutenant Chen settled into her shooting position with apparent calm, but Maria could see the subtle signs of controlled tension that indicated peak focus. The lieutenant made the environmental adjustments they had discussed, compensating for factors that weren't reflected in the standard range indicators. The moments before the shot seemed to stretch forever. Maria found herself holding her breath as Lieutenant Chen controlled her breathing, aligned her sight picture, and prepared to fire. The entire range was quiet except for the distant sound of wind through the facility's structures. The rifle cracked with sharp authority, and Maria watched the bullet's path toward the distant target. Even before the spotter's call came over the intercom, she could see that the shot had found its mark in a way that previous attempts had not. "Bullseye, perfect center, mass," the spotter's voice echoed across the range. A moment of stunned silence was followed by excited congratulations from fellow candidates and surprised approval from the instructors. Lieutenant Chen had not only qualified, but had achieved one of the most precise shots seen on the range in months. Commander Morrison approached Lieutenant Chen's position, clearly puzzled by the dramatic improvement in her performance. "Outstanding shot, Lieutenant. What adjustments did you make since yesterday's session?" Lieutenant Chen glanced briefly toward Maria's position before responding. "I spent time analyzing environmental factors more carefully, sir. Paid closer attention to variables that might not be immediately obvious." Master Chief Torres, who had been observing the session, nodded approvingly. "That's the mark of a true sniper, the ability to read conditions that others miss. Well done, Lieutenant." As the session continued with other candidates, Maria felt a complex mix of pride and anxiety. Her guidance had proven effective, but the implications of this success raised questions about how much more she might contribute to the program if given the opportunity. Lieutenant Chen's success had not gone unnoticed by the instructors, who were eager to understand what had caused such a dramatic improvement. However, the lieutenant honored her agreement with Maria, attributing her success to enhanced environmental awareness without revealing the source of her insights. Later that day, as Maria continued her cleaning duties, she overheard conversations among the instructors about Lieutenant Chen's remarkable performance. They were analyzing her technique, trying to identify the factors that had led to such precise accuracy after previous failures. "If we could bottle whatever Chen figured out and share it with other candidates, we might solve our qualification rate problem," Sergeant Williams commented to Commander Morrison. "The question is whether it was a breakthrough in understanding or just a lucky shot," Commander Morrison replied. We need to see if she can repeat the performance consistently. Maria knew that consistency would depend on continued access to her environmental insights, but the covert nature of their arrangement made such support problematic. She faced a decision about whether to reveal her role in Lieutenant Chen's success, knowing that doing so would expose her to potential ridicule or dismissal. That evening brought another private conversation between Maria and Lieutenant Chen. The lieutenant was eager to continue their collaboration, but both women understood the risks involved. Your insights saved my career today, Lieutenant Chen said gratefully. But I know this arrangement can't continue indefinitely without someone noticing. Have you considered sharing your knowledge more formally? Maria shook her head. Who would listen to a custodian's theories about Navy SEAL sniper training? My observations might be accurate, but my credentials wouldn't impress anyone in command. Lieutenant Chen was quiet for a moment before suggesting an alternative. What if there was a way to test your theories more broadly, to prove their value in a way that couldn't be dismissed regardless of the source? The two women began discussing possibilities, unaware that their conversation was being overheard by someone whose presence would soon change everything about their carefully maintained secret. Master Chief Torres had been making his evening rounds when he overheard the conversation between Maria and Lieutenant Chen. Hidden in the shadows near the maintenance building, he listened with growing amazement as the two women discussed detailed environmental factors and shooting theories that demonstrated a level of understanding he hadn't expected from anyone outside the elite sniper community. The next morning, Master Chief Torres approached Commander Morrison with a request that would forever change the dynamics at the Coronado Naval Base firing range. Jake, I need you to trust me on something unusual, Master Chief Torres said, his weathered face serious with purpose. I want to arrange a special demonstration that might solve our qualification rate problem, but it's going to require you to keep an open mind about unconventional approaches. Commander Morrison, desperate for any solution that might improve their training program, agreed without knowing the full implications of what he was authorizing. Master Chief Torres then approached Maria during her morning cleaning routine, startling her with his knowledge of her secret coaching arrangement. Mrs. Santos, he said quietly, I overheard your conversation with Lieutenant Chen last night. Don't worry, you're not in trouble. In fact, I think you might be the solution we've all been looking for. Maria's face flushed with embarrassment and fear. Her carefully maintained invisibility had been shattered, and she expected immediate consequences for overstepping her boundaries as support staff. I know this puts you in an uncomfortable position, Master Chief Torres continued. But I've spent 30 years in the teams, and I recognize expertise when I hear it. Your insights about this range are more sophisticated than most of our formal training materials. The legendary sniper outlined a plan that would test Maria's theories in the most public way possible. He proposed a shooting demonstration where Maria would have the opportunity to prove her understanding of the range conditions by taking the 800-yard shot that had defeated so many qualified military marksmen. Sir, with respect, I'm not military trained, Maria protested. I've never fired a weapon in my life. I only understand the theory, not the practical application. Master Chief Torres smiled grimly. Theory and observation are often more valuable than rote training. Besides, if you're wrong about the environmental factors, the worst that happens is a missed shot. If you're right, you might revolutionize how we approach sniper training. Word of the unusual demonstration spread quickly through the base. Admiral Patterson himself arrived to witness what was being described as either an innovative training experiment or an elaborate practical joke. The entire sniper training staff assembled on the range, along with current candidates and several visiting officers from other commands. Maria stood at the firing line, wearing safety gear that felt foreign and uncomfortable. The rifle in her hands was heavier than she had expected, and the attention from dozens of elite military personnel was overwhelming. Whispers and skeptical comments followed her as she approached the shooting position. This is ridiculous, she heard someone mutter. We're supposed to take shooting advice from the cleaning lady. Commander Morrison looked uncomfortable with the entire situation, but his respect for Master Chief Torres kept him from canceling the demonstration. Lieutenant Chen stood among the observers, her face showing a mixture of support and anxiety for the woman who had quietly helped her achieve success. Master Chief Torres approached Maria at the firing line, his voice calm and encouraging. Forget about everyone watching. Focus on what you've learned about this range. Trust your observations about wind patterns, heat distortion, and optimal timing. You understand these conditions better than anyone here. Maria tried to block out the skeptical murmurs from the crowd as she studied the range conditions. The afternoon sun was creating the heat mirages she had observed for years, and the wind flags showed patterns that she knew were misleading based on the actual air currents affecting bullet trajectory. As she settled into the shooting position, Maria's years of watching other shooters suddenly became practical knowledge. She adjusted her stance based on techniques she had seen work for successful candidates, incorporating environmental compensations that her observations had taught her were necessary. The weight of the rifle felt awkward, but Maria forced herself to focus on the fundamentals she had watched being demonstrated thousands of times. Breathing control, sight alignment, trigger squeeze, all concepts she understood intellectually but had never physically practiced. "Take your time," Master Chief Torres said quietly. "There's no rush. Read the conditions the way you've been teaching yourself to do." Maria studied the distant target through the scope, noting how the heat distortion affected the image in ways that matched her written observations. She made adjustments based on wind patterns that only she seemed to recognize, compensating for factors that weren't reflected in the standard range indicators. The skeptical comments from the crowd grew louder as Maria took longer than expected to prepare her shot. Some observers began questioning the wisdom of allowing an untrained civilian to handle military weapons, while others wondered aloud about the sanity of the entire demonstration. Admiral Patterson watched silently, his expression unreadable as he observed this unprecedented situation. The reputation of the entire sniper training program was potentially at stake based on the performance of a custodian who had never received formal marksmanship training. Maria's breathing steadied as she applied the techniques she had observed Lieutenant Chen using successfully. She could feel her heart rate slowing as she entered the focused state she had watched elite marksmen achieve before taking their shots. The range fell silent as Maria prepared to fire. Even the skeptics stopped their commentary, recognizing that the moment of truth had arrived. Years of quiet observation were about to be tested in the most public way possible. The rifle cracked with surprising authority, and Maria felt the recoil push against her shoulder. The sound echoed across the range as everyone waited for the spotter's call. The seconds stretched endlessly as the bullet traveled toward the distant target. "Bullseye, dead center," the spotter's voice crackled over the intercom, his tone reflecting his own surprise at the result. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Master Chief Torres' quiet chuckle. "Outstanding shot, Mrs. Santos. Textbook execution under pressure." The crowd of observers erupted in amazed conversation, with some still refusing to believe what they had witnessed. A custodian with no formal training had achieved perfect accuracy on a shot that had defeated some of the military's most elite marksmen. Admiral Patterson approached the firing line, his expression now showing keen interest rather than skepticism. "Mrs. Santos, that was a remarkable demonstration. I'd like to understand how someone without military training achieved that level of precision." Maria, still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the moment, began explaining her years of observation and environmental analysis. She described the wind patterns she had mapped, the heat distortion effects she had documented, and the optimal timing strategies she had developed through patient study. "I've watched thousands of shots taken on this range," she said, her voice growing stronger as she shared knowledge she had kept hidden for so long. "The environmental factors here are more complex than they appear, and the standard indicators don't account for all the variables that affect long-range accuracy." Lieutenant Chen stepped forward from the crowd, adding her support to Maria's explanation. "Mrs. Santos provided insights that were crucial to my recent qualification success. Her understanding of this range's specific characteristics goes beyond anything in our training manuals." Commander Morrison, still processing what he had witnessed, began asking technical questions about Maria's observations. Her detailed responses demonstrated a level of understanding that impressed even the experienced instructors who had initially doubted her capabilities. "Mrs. Santos has identified environmental factors that we've been missing for years," Commander Morrison admitted to Admiral Patterson. "Her success wasn't luck, It was the application of sophisticated understanding gained through careful observation. Admiral Patterson nodded thoughtfully. This demonstrates the value of fresh perspectives and unconventional approaches to training challenges. Mrs. Santos, would you be willing to share your insights more formally with our training program? The suggestion that a custodian might become an official consultant to the elite Navy SEAL sniper program was unprecedented, but the evidence of Maria's expertise was undeniable. Her perfect shot had validated years of quiet observation and careful analysis. Over the following days, Maria found herself in the unusual position of reviewing training protocols with military officers who had previously barely acknowledged her existence. Her notebook became the foundation for updated environmental awareness training that addressed the specific characteristics of the Coronado Range. The changes implemented based on Maria's insights led to dramatic improvements in candidate success rates. Environmental factors that had been overlooked for years were now properly accounted for, and candidates began achieving qualification scores that had been rare in previous training cycles. Lieutenant Chen became one of the most successful graduates in the program's recent history, her initial coaching relationship with Maria evolving into a lasting friendship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. Master Chief Torres, whose intuition about Maria's value had been proven correct, became her strongest advocate within the military hierarchy. His endorsement carried weight that opened doors Maria had never imagined possible. Experience comes in many forms, he often said when describing the situation to other commands. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from the most unexpected sources. The key is recognizing expertise regardless of where you find it. The story of the custodian who had outshot elite Navy SEALs spread throughout the military community, becoming a legend that challenged assumptions about expertise, observation, and the value of different perspectives. Maria's transformation from invisible support staff to respected consultant demonstrated that knowledge and understanding could develop in unexpected ways. Admiral Patterson included Maria's success story in his report to Pentagon leadership, recommending that other training facilities examine whether similar insights might be gained from support staff who had been observing training protocols for extended periods. We discovered that one of our most valuable training resources had been hiding in plain sight for 8 years, he wrote. This experience suggests that we should be more attentive to insights that might exist within our own organizations, regardless of the source. Maria continued working at the Coronado base, but her role expanded far beyond custodial duties. She became an environmental specialist whose observations informed training protocols and helped candidates understand the complex factors affecting long-range accuracy. The respect she earned from the elite military personnel who now sought her advice represented a transformation that went beyond professional recognition. Maria had found her voice and her value in an environment where she had previously been invisible. The 800-yard target that had once seemed impossible became achievable for candidates who learned to apply Maria's insights about environmental compensation and range-specific factors. Her quiet years of observation had produced knowledge that revolutionized training approaches and improved outcomes for some of the military's most demanding programs. Looking back, Maria often reflected on the courage it had taken to step forward and share knowledge she had accumulated in solitude. The risk of ridicule and dismissal had been real, but the potential value of her insights had ultimately proven too important to keep hidden. Her story became proof that expertise could develop in unexpected ways, that careful observation over time could produce understanding that rivaled formal training, and that sometimes the most valuable perspectives came from those who watched quietly from the margins rather than those who performed center stage. The custodian who had been mocked as out of place in an elite military environment had become the teacher whose insights elevated the performance of some of the world's most skilled marksmen. Her perfect shot had been more than a demonstration of accuracy. It had been a validation of the power of patient observation, careful analysis, and the courage to share knowledge when it mattered most.